So today is January 27th, and I'm here with Mr. Sam Nusinov, who fought in the Second World War. When were you born, sir?
I was born in Argentina. When in June 25th, 1922.
And do you want to talk about how you grew up and your parents and their background?
Yes. My parents' background was that they escaped from Russia in the early 20s after the revolution. The Tsar's people were very, very brutal. During any of the religious holidays, the Jewish people would not go out because the non-Jewish people there were told to beat them up or kill them. And during that period of time is when they had what they called the pogroms. The pogroms were where they were taking these people, either hanging them or beating them badly or doing all kinds of crazy things because of who they were, not because they committed any crimes. So it came to a point where my parents saw that they had no future, and this was in the early 20s, and the revolution had occurred already, but the communists were just as bad or worse than the Tsar's people. So my father was a young jeweler in Russia, and what he did, he made some gold trinkets. He contacted a farmer and gave the farmer some gold trinkets to smuggle my father, my mother, and my older brother out of Russia under a wagon load of hay. Wow. And so when they came close to the border area, the farmer came back, it was with a horse and wagon, came back and he said to my parents, make sure the baby doesn't cry. That was my older brother. He was an infant at the time. So she says, I'll nurse him. So they got across the border safely. They went into Poland. From Poland, they went to Germany. From Germany, they got onto a ship and they went to Argentina because they could not come here because of the quota system. But that's where I was born. So, but I came here as an infant after my parents lived in Argentina for several years. And I was born in 1922. So they came here legally, of course, because they had to wait their turn to be able to come in. And from that point on, we lived in an area in Baltimore, Maryland. My uncle, who was already here, who ran away years before, he vouched for them so they could come to the United States. And so when they came here, my father went to work, opened up a little shop because he was a jeweler. He knew how to do repairs. My father and my mother and my older brother lived in East Baltimore, on East Baltimore Street in the city of Baltimore. So we actually lived there for a short period of time. Then my parents moved to the outskirts of Baltimore. And there I grew up. It was an area called Reisterstown Road in Baltimore, Maryland.
Northwest.
Yeah, it's the northwest part of Baltimore. But again, there was tremendous amounts of discrimination in that time.
Wow.
Even in Baltimore. There was a situation where the blacks couldn't live in our area at all. And we as Jewish people had to live in just certain areas in Baltimore. People don't know these things. That's why I want the truth to come out. So I grew up in Baltimore, and all my friends, we had a very mixed group of Jewish people and Christians. It was just a general low income group, and that's where I grew up. And of course, growing up with all these people, I knew how to get along with everyone. There was no problems. None of us had problems. We never had any religious problems or anything.
And this was in the late 20s, right? Early 30s?
Yes.
And what was it like living through the stock market crash of 1929? Did your family get affected?
He was only 7 years old.
I was too young to really.
Oh, to remember? Okay.
Yeah, I was
Probably 7.
7 years
Because
old
he was
at
in
the
29.
time. So, my father, you know, when a person like my father works at the bench, working with their hands and creating things, they usually did okay because there was always a constant demand for people who could do that type of work. So he opened his own store and he started doing the work, and we lived a very comfortable, meager life. We didn't have any
That's good.
fancy things.
Because most people in the 1920s got affected. Inflation was up in the United States and unemployment was up 50%. So that's very
no,
lucky.
it was bad times.
And my
But-
parents lost their house.
Wow.
But a lot of people lost everything. But nevertheless, I grew up, and it was a rural area, and we got a lot of our actual training that helped us when we went into the service. I had a couple friends that lived on farms across the railroad tracks near where we grew up. And we used to go over to the farm and help them with different labor and all. It was just a very, very, I'd say, a good life. Not a fancy life, but a good life. But it gave us great training. That's why I say when we went into service, I didn't have any trouble going on hikes because we used to hike all the time. And we used to eat the fruit off of the trees in the woods. And it was just a good experience. But anything you want to ask me?
Now I want to talk about the 30s. Obviously, with Japanese aggression in the early 1930s as they invade Manchuria in northern China. Do you recall anything with like the news, learning about the Japanese aggression and the United States responding?
Yes, because my aunt Rivka was married to a Marine, and he was over there in trying to think, it was not Manchuria, but he was in the main area where they had came in contact with the Japanese, and according to what he used to tell her, they were not nice people. I found that out myself because I served in the Pacific during the war, so I know what they were like.
Obviously, in the early 30s, the Japanese will be invading into China and they will be massacring hundreds of thousands of Chinese.
They mistreated everyone. In fact, my uncle, my aunt Rivka's husband, his name was, can't remember his first name, his last name was Mandel. He almost started an incident because he beat up some Japanese soldiers. He was a tough Marine. So that was just one of the incidences that I can recall.
And what about on the Europeans? For obviously, with tensions rising in Europe as Hitler starts breaking the Treaty of Versailles and marching into the Rhine and rearming his army. Did you also hear about the European front as Hitler rises to power in the early 30s?
Well, we knew some of it, but you know, the news media didn't reveal too much. You know, I don't know why it was, whether they were afraid to antagonize Hitler or what the story was. But we knew that something was going on, but we did not know exactly what.
Excuse me, there was a radio commentator named Kaltenborn.
Yeah.
And in the movies, if you had pennies to go to the movies, they had a program called March of Time. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
You used to
And
see
they showed-
news about,
Yeah, they showed what was happening in Europe.
but they didn't talk about the concentration camps.
Yeah, because that started early, even in the 30s, as Hitler rose to power in
He
1933.
had concentration camps started in those days. And when they tell you the people there were not aware of what was going on, that's not true. They knew. Not only did they know, but whenever the Germans came into areas like they came in to take over part of Czechoslovakia, because they said there were a lot of Germanic people there and they were not being
The
treated.
Anschluss.
Excuse me?
It's called the Anschluss.
Yeah, but they
Auschwitz.
say they
Auschwitz,
weren't
yeah.
treated right, and they threatened the Czechs very much. So England, of course, opposed this and didn't do anything militarily, but they sent Neville Chamberlain there to talk it over with the German officials and decide what they were going to do, and they decided to just give part of Czechoslovakia to Germany.
The border region, the Sudetenland, that's what they call it.
Right.
And now we're going to go into the war. War breaks out September 1st, 1939. How was like the reaction? Do you remember the reaction when war broke out in Europe for the first time?
Well, we were totally opposed to going in there, but we did give tremendous support to England. And of course, if we didn't give the support that we did, England would have fallen also. So Winston Churchill, who was a hero, said, if it wasn't for America, England would not have survived.
At the time in 1939, did you think the United States will end up getting into the war?
I didn't have any idea that we were going to get involved because there were so many people here that were opposed to war. I'm opposed to war, but if there's a legitimate reason to go to war, yes, we have to do what we have to do to survive.
And obviously, 2 years later, the Japanese armed forces will drop bombs and attack Pearl Harbor, and the next day, the Congress will declare war against Japan. So now let's talk about your service. At what year did you enlisted in the armed forces?
Well, when they started the draft, of course, my older brother was drafted, and he was put into to the 7th Armored Division with. At that time, I don't know who the commander was, whether it was Pat, I don't think it was Patton, it was some of the others. And he did a lot of training in this country, preparing ourselves to go somewhere. I didn't know when or where, but my brother took all this training here in the desert out in the west, and he was in the 7th Armored Division in reconnaissance. And he had a pretty miserable job, to say the least. But I didn't go in until it was October 1942 that I enlisted. But I got together with some of my friends in the neighborhood that I grew up with, and we decided it's time to enlist. So we all went down to Johns Hopkins Hospital to get the checkups and all, and to enlist at that time. And we all were in the service, various branches of the service. One of my best friends, it was like my brother, I said, he didn't want to join. His name was Stanley Turrell. I said, Stanley, what are you going to do? He said, I'm not joining those sissy outfits. He said, I'm joining the Marines. So he joined the Marines, and consequently, he was in all the battles in the South Pacific, and he was killed on Iwo Jima. Wow. So, you know, this is the way things went, unfortunately.
And how old were you when you enlisted?
20 years old.
So now let's talk about what you did. So when you enlisted, how was the training? How was training life? Training before you were sent off into the Pacific.
The funny thing is that I enlisted as an instrument man because I know how to repair instruments, I know how to repair watches, and there was a need for people like that. But when we first went in, we were sent to Virginia, and then from Virginia we were sent to Pennsylvania. from Pennsylvania, we were sent to Michigan. And when I got to Michigan, they said, the corporal came down, this whole line of us who had just come up to our base. It was Kellogg Field in Battle Creek, Michigan. And he said, from this point on down, you are all in the 10-12 Guard Squadron. And this group, you're all going to be MPs. And I'm listening because I didn't enlist for that. So I was a little disturbed. So I said, okay, I'll pay attention because I figure I'm not going to start up anything. And after a while, it got to a point where I just didn't like the idea of being an MP. And so I went over to headquarters and I volunteered to become an aerial gunner. And I passed my physical, but unfortunately I was colorblind. So they told me, you can't go.
Thank God.
They threw me out and they put me back into the MPs, which in reality saved my life because most of the guys who became aerial gunners, a good portion of them were killed. So it was a good move in that respect.
And now let's talk about when you actually go to the Asian theater. Where were you first? Where did you first arrive when you went to the East Pacific?
No, we didn't. We were first. We took I was sent during the time that they put me back into the military police group, and they sent me to military police school at Barksdale Field, Louisiana. And there we took our overseas training also. And, but I wasn't happy about going there, but I was one of the few that went to military police school. Most of the fellows that you saw that had MP armbands on, they never went to military police school. I did, I graduated. And so I thought it was a good thing to do, and I wasn't so concerned about it anymore. And but we did our training down at Barksdale Field, and we went on some long field hikes and went through a lot of pre-battle training, you know, where the planes attacked us, dropped gas on us. We had to put our gas masks on and various other things. And it was quite an experience, but it was good training. Then after I came from there, I was sent back to my home base, Kellogg Field. And from there, I was sent, they did some really wild things. I was sent from there to Brownwood, Texas. Why? I don't know.
You traveled a lot.
You have no idea. But they sent me to Brownwood, Texas, and I found out we're closing that base up and we're going for the invasion of Sicily.
Wow.
Yeah. So we ended up, it was only about 15 of us left at this air base, and we were getting all the preparations made. And I have to bring this point in. Out of the clear blue sky, we had a tornado that hit the area. It wreaked havoc on our base, and all the electricity was out. Everything was almost at a standstill, and it was late at night, and we heard a plane flying overhead. It kept circling the area. They knew there was an air base there, but they didn't know where, because everything went out except some of the auxiliary lights that were able to function. So we said to the sergeant, what are we going to do? He says, we're going to take our vehicles and line them up across the runway, you know, at the end of the runway, so the plane knows where they are and where to land. Plane came down, landed safely, and when they got out, they said, where are we? Even their communication was out. We said, you're in Brownwood, Texas. They said, Texas? We thought we were in Oklahoma. So luckily, because the sergeant had the smarts and he knew what to do, there was 15 people on the plane. They all got off safely, so that, you know, it's another incident that I think is interesting.
Yeah, of course. And what year is this? What year? What time frame are we in right now?
Excuse me?
What year are we in right now? Like what you just told me about the tornado. What year?
At Barstow Field?
Yeah.
No, not Barstow, I mean Brownwood, early 1945.
Oh, okay. And then.
Mark was a baby, I remember.
Huh?
Mark was a
No,
baby.
that was later.
And what day did you go to Japan or the Asian area?
I didn't, believe it or not, I went to, we went to Guam first. We were sent to Fort Lewis in Washington, the state of Washington, and there we picked up a troop ship. There were 3,000 of us on the troop ship, plus the crew. And so we left from Fort Lewis with a convoy, and we were zigzagging across the Pacific. About the 5th day out, our engines on our ship broke down. So they left us with a sub-chaser to run around our ship, and the rest of them left us there. And at that period of time, the Japanese had a very strong presence of all types of submarines and everything. They had a better fleet than we did. So we were all wondering what's going to happen next, because here we're sitting there, we're dead in the water. We were there for about 5 or 6 hours till they repaired the engines. Then we took off on our own and zigzagged across the Pacific. We were on that ship for 21 days.
Wow. And where do you go from the ship? Like, where was your destination?
So we didn't know where we were going. In fact, our officers wouldn't tell us. When we left Fort Lewis, they gave us winter clothes, they gave us summer clothes. So I said, where are we going? No one would talk about it. Mom was the word. You know, we never discussed especially the officers, they would never tell us where we were
They used to
heading.
say loose slips sink ships.
Well, it's
That
true.
was the motto at that time.
It's all right. I didn't object to that.
That's true.
Yeah. But once we got there, then I our first time, about maybe 10 days out, we stopped in an island called Eniwetok, which was to give us a resting period. So to get off the ship and, you know, down the scramble nets and all, and into the landing craft and go on to shore. And that island was so destroyed because our guys had taken it away from the Japs, and everything was totally messed up. But they gave us like Coca-Cola or beer, whatever we wanted. Then within a few hours, we loaded back onto the ship and we continued zigzagging. We ended up going to Guam. The war was still in full force when we got there, and when we landed there and we start talking, here I have to show you something. We start talking and said, you know, I think we're going to go in for the invasion of Japan, because why would they have given us summer clothes and winter clothes? So we knew we were going somewhere, but they wouldn't tell us where. I just want to show you a few pictures that I carry as a reminder, when I think things are bad, they're not bad. These were on Guam during the war. This was one of the first pictures. That's how we were living.
And for the camera, I want to show you guys. This was.
Yeah, this one.
You guys can see it.
I have it
Where's your
there. Huh?
Where's your antique?
I got
in
it
the first
somewhere.
page.
I don't know.
It's not there.
But this is a reminder. That's the way we were living. what did they do during that time that we were there? They used to assign us to different things because the war was still going on full force. Day and night, the B-29s were coming into our base. It was North Field on Guam, and they were going towards Japan to bomb them, to try to get them to give up. But they would not give up. They had no intentions of giving up.
And this was, we're still in like the early 1945, right?
Yes, oh yeah, this was already like August of 1945.
Also, the Europeans already surrendered. So
yeah,
the
but
Germans
they had surrendered.
In August.
Japan surrendered in September. So if we didn't, I had a job of guarding Japanese prisoners of war.
Wow.
In fact, if you look on the wall, I have that's some of my handkerchiefs that some of the prisoners did for me.
I'll take pictures of that. And
So-
how many prisoners, more or less, were you in charge of?
Probably no more than about 20, 25. But there were hundreds of them in the jungles all around us. They were in there. In my book, there's different articles there about different guys who went on patrol and got our guys who got killed because the Japanese wouldn't surrender. But one interesting point was one day while we were out there guarding these prisoners, out of the jungles came a group of about 8 Japanese soldiers to surrender because we had dropped a lot of leaflets for them to surrender because the war was winding down. But these 8 came out of the jungle. They had 2 slave girls with them. You familiar with that? Okay. The present Premier of Japan denies that they ever did these things.
Oh, they did.
You know what? I wrote an article and sent it into the newspaper. They didn't print it, but I sent it into the magazine that I subscribed to called the World War II magazine. They wrote the whole article and it went all over the country. He denies that they did these things. I said, I'm a living witness, and as long as I'm alive, people are going to know what they did. I said, he's trying to change history. That's why I say it's so important that people know history.
And did you see any combat
No.
while you were over there?
I was fortunate. I missed it on several occasions. The worst that ever happened to me is I was injured by a runaway Jeep and put in the hospital, knocked unconscious and
And the mumps.
what?
The mumps saved your life.
Yeah, no, then another time when I was getting ready to go, after we were closing down the base to go to Sicily, I came down with the mumps.
Wow.
They put me in a
Thank God,
hospital,
thank God.
and I was in the hospital for several months, so I missed that. But it was shortly thereafter they gave me papers, what they call detached service, and they sent me to Oklahoma. And there I picked up my orders to go overseas.
That's good.
Yeah, so I went home. My wife had a baby, and I went home to see them. Then I got on a train.
It's a 73-year-old baby now.
Yeah. I got on a train, and the train was heading towards the state of Washington. I got on in Washington, D.C., and I looked around. I was carrying a duffel bag with all my things that I had, and I'm looking. There was not one seat available on that train. I sat on that duffel bag from Washington, D.C. till we got to Utah
Wow.
because there was no seats available.
And I want to go back to when you were patrolling, when you were in charge of the Japanese POWs. What was like their reactions to?
They were very well behaved because I also had guarded German prisoners of war when I was in Michigan.
Really?
Yes, they were part of Rommel's desert storm.
The African corpse.
Yeah, yes. They were arrogant, they were nasty, they were just not, I could understand some German. In fact, my older brother, he spoke a lot of German, plus he understood German. He became his interpreter for his outfit in the 7th Armored Division where he was. So, and his is also a very interesting point of view because he was in all the battles. He was in the Battle of the Bulge. He got wounded there. He was on patrol one day during the Battle of the Bulge and did not realize he was driving a Jeep and he had an observer with him. And they didn't realize that the Germans had their famous 88 weapons.
Yeah.
And when he got to a certain point, they fired at their Jeep. They killed the guy that was with him, knocked the Jeep off the road, knocked my brother almost unconscious, but not knocked out. He knew enough to realize what was going on.
So he saw a lot.
Yeah, well, he went through a tremendous amount.
And that's unfortunate.
Well, he got,
The infantry.
yeah, well, it was worse than the infantry. He was also one of the group that helped to liberate the guys that were surrounded at Bastogne.
Wow.
His group, because I found this out later through speaking to someone who knew I was a World War II veteran, and I came into their place of business and they said, "Oh, here comes another World War II veteran." And with that, this man came over to me who looked like he's my age, and he said, "Where were you?" I said, "I was on Guam and Saipan during the war." He said, "Oh, you were in a hellhole." I said, "Tell me about it." I said, "I felt like I was in a prison camp." I said, "Were you there also?" He says, "Yes." He says, "I was a medical doctor and I was treating our boys and I was treating the Germans, and we were surrounded by the Germans, and he was with that group where the German officer said they want him to surrender, and he told them nuts." I don't know if you're familiar with that expression.
That story, it's a big story about
Yeah, it happened in Bastogne. He said nuts. And so when I tell the man, my brother was in the 7th Armored Division, he said, "They saved our life."
Wow.
So he comes over to me, gives me a kiss on my cheek. He said, "That's for your brother."
Aw.
He was a medical doctor. He says it was the worst experience.
No, yeah.
Well,
Sammy was very
but my
fortunate.
brother continued on to go all the way to the Battle of the Remagen Bridgehead, which was a big battle because it was leading into Germany. And they captured Remagen, and a short time afterwards he interrogated the people there and got a lot of information. And he also said when they came back out, he had all kinds of equipment that they confiscated and put into the Jeep. And a short period after that, a landmine went off and almost killed him. So he had to be evacuated to the States. But
Fortunately, he was alive.
what I'm bringing out this point is that he was not born in this country, but he was willing to fight and die for
Of
it.
course.
I wasn't born here. I was willing to die for it. I could care less. It's just very important to do these things.
And when you were in Michigan charging the Germans, were they still in uniform? I
No,
read something about that.
No, they had the regular uniforms for prisoners, POWs.
You want light? You want the light on?
Oh, that's fine. I have perfect lighting here.
Because it's getting so cloudy now.
And another question, did they know that you were Jewish?
Who, the Germans?
Yeah.
Probably, because they were saying some horrible things about us. But you know what? I have one thing in my mind. You're the prisoner, I'm guarding you, you're not guarding me. But we treated them humanely. That's another thing I like to bring out. Never, I was an MP for 3.5 years. Never did I ever see any of our guys to mistreat any of the prisoners. Never. So, you know, you hear stories, but I know a lot of things went, you know, were crazy during the war, but we didn't treat them, we treated them very well.
No, I know for a fact the Japanese didn't treat.
They treated our guys horribly, and if you want, I'll divert from my experience to another experience. We were being honored at the World War II Museum, all the World War II veterans. This was how long ago? About 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
Yeah, 4 years.
We were all being honored, so we went there. I went with my other friend who was also out in the Pacific area.
In the Navy.
Yeah,
In the Navy.
Irv Apatow, and he was also Jewish. So this is why I get a little disturbed, because a lot of us who were Jewish, we were treated okay. But it's like my older brother who went through all these things, and regardless of what his rank was and all, he was never able to go beyond being a PFC. I never got beyond being a PFC. I was the only Jewish guy in my outfit. But it didn't bother me, because I knew we had to do what was right. And that's
crazy how like the Germans treated you unfairly. Like not unfairly when you're guarding, like how they like talk to you and such. Did they talk English?
No. They spoke in German, but I understood some of the things.
The Yiddish
They used,
and
yeah.
German are very close.
So
If you hear the other language, you can usually pick up exactly.
Wow.
You know.
they made a lot of nasty comments about us, about all the American soldiers. They were just a nasty bunch.
And were they like put to work, the Germans?
No, they worked. They were shoveling snow and everything. This was in the winter.
Oh.
We're standing there freezing.
Because I know that once Rommel's army surrendered in 1943, about 300,000 of Hitler's African corpses were sent to America.
A lot of them remained here. You know, when I was lucky enough to go on the honor flights. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, that's how I was able to find you.
Yeah,
That's how he found
my youngest daughter Lisa is very involved with that group. She has accompanied, I think, another World War II veteran, and she's the one that convinced me to go. And
I've got a lot of stuff in my
so many of you guys went.
oh, you know, there were 16 million of us that went at that time. There's less, I think there's less than 400,000.
In 2016, they did a study about 500,000 American troops are still alive.
Yeah, it's about 400 and something.
Yeah.
I'm still lucky, you know, I'm messed up, but it's all right. I'll survive.
Of course. You survived a lot so far. You could do it.
I won't let him go.
Well, but all the guys in in my neighborhood were all poor working people. All of us went into service. The only ones that didn't go, one of my friends who had infantile paralysis and he was paralyzed, he didn't go. My other friend, Eddie Browse, my neighborhood there was a lot of Jewish people, but it was mixed. There was a lot of everybody, Christians, everybody in that neighborhood. And Eddie Browse was one of my very closest friends. He was Christian, but a super person. He couldn't go because he had lost part of his leg. So there was a bad situation. It has nothing to do with the war other than he didn't get into the service. But anything else you tell?
I want to talk to you about your opinion on the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Oh, well, the man who was the only one that flew in both planes that helped to drop the atomic bomb. His name was Jacob Beazle. He was from Baltimore. His mother was my son's school teacher. His mother. He he happened to be Jewish too. Jacob Beezer. He's the only guy that flew in both planes and helped drop both. And I personally, I wrote an article. It's in there too. I don't like the idea of the atomic bombs at all. But in a situation like that,
This is the crew from the Enola Gay.
you have pictures of the crew, have a whole write-up in there.
Wow.
These are friends. The one all the way in the left there,
This is the
top
one who's
left, he's my friend that wouldn't join with us and was killed in Iwo Jima.
Oh, that's horrible.
These were all my friends that were killed early on in the war.
These were your childhood friends, or the
Yes,
ones that
yeah,
your childhood
yeah.
friends? Wow. And were you still in over there when they dropped the bombs?
No, I got there just as they dropped the bomb, but they wouldn't give up.
I know they wouldn't.
That's why
they
they
surrendered
dropped.
a couple days later.
You know, when I was there, the B-29s were coming and going day and night, dropping bombs, and it was such a long distance. That's why they did all the island hopping, because they were trying to capture air bases where they could land the 29s closer to Japan, so we wouldn't have so many of them, have to ditch it into the ocean. So that's why we went after Iwo Jima, because that was a very close base.
So now Japan will surrender, and now we become the victors of the world. What was your reaction when finally the war was over?
Loved it. I was away from my home. I was away for all the holiday seasons for 4 years. It's a long time. And my only regret, they came around to our outfit and they said, the war is winding down. We think the Japanese are going to surrender. And they said, we need security people. Because they knew my past. I had a good record. I never got in trouble in the Army. And they said, would you like to go and be one of the security people in the Missouri? I said, I don't think so. And I regret it now, because during the war, when they would come up with crazy ideas, it was never true. They would tell you, you want to be the colonel's driver? They say, oh yeah, they give you a wheelbarrow. You drive the gravel and all. We were menial laborers ourselves.
And once you got home from the war, what did you do on for the rest of your life?
I was in the jewelry business. I sold material, watch material, clock material in Baltimore with my brothers, my two brothers. The younger brother, he was in the Korean War. My older brother was the one that was with Patton. So we were all in the business. We got out of service, and we built up a fantastic business in Baltimore. And we were known in those days as the jeweler's jeweler, because we had a lot of shops. We used to do our own jewelry work. We used to do our own clock work. We used to have hand engraving. We used to have machine engraving. We used to do everything. We did work for other stores. So we built up a nice business, but it was all hard work.
And how old were you, and what year did you get married?
How old was I when I got married? I was 21.
Because your mother didn't have to sign. My mother had to sign for me because
She was
17.
she wasn't quite 18. I met my wife maybe a month or two before I went into service.
And you guys got married
Maybe.
1 month later, and still married till today.
Oh yeah, we've
75
been married
years.
74
75
years. Yeah, it'll
wow.
be 75 in July.
Wow, that's almost a quarter of a century.
Yeah.
And how many kids have you guys had together?
3.
Wow, that's good.
I have two daughters and 1 son. They're all great. My children are really good children.
And your service, there's nothing you regret about it.
I'd do it again if I had to.
Is there anything else you would like to say to the camera before?
Only to the youngsters, please be good citizens. It's very important to appreciate the fact that you're living in America, because I've lived in other places and I've been in other places. There's no place like America. We may go through some different discussions about politics and all, but that's what makes our country great. And I always kid when I went, I've never missed voting, not one time, the whole time I was old enough to vote. And the last election I went to vote, and when I came out I was wearing my cap, and this young fellow came over and he says, "Oh," he said, "where were you?" I said, "I was on Guam and Saipan during the war." He says, "Great." I said, "No, it wasn't great." I said, "But I'd do it again." I said, "I'm one of those crazy immigrants that I've been accused of being this and that." I said, "But I was willing to sacrifice my life where a lot of the politicians today never wanted to go and they avoided going. I went willingly, so I don't regret it." So I always say, be good citizens. That's number one. And also respect your teachers, because without your teachers, you're nothing but a wild animal.
Well, thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.